Here's a sentence most people don't want to hear. Working hard at a job is not the same thing as building wealth. And Warren Buffett understood that better than almost anyone. This isn't about intelligence. It's not about effort. It's not about being lazy or unmotivated. It's about structure. Most employees are trapped in a system that looks safe, feels responsible, and sounds smart, but quietly works against wealth. And the scary part is this: the system doesn't feel like a trap while you're inside it. It feels normal. You wake up, you go to work, you get paid, you pay bills, you repeat. Years pass. From the outside, everything looks fine. Stable, respectable, predictable. But Buffett noticed something early on that most people don't realize until it's too late. Income is not the same as ownership. And without ownership, wealth has a very low ceiling. Most employees believe that if they just earn more, save more, and stay disciplined, everything will eventually work out. And for basic comfort, that's often true. But Buffett wasn't interested in comfort. He was interested in how wealth actually compounds. And compounding doesn't work well when your upside is capped and your time is sold by the hour. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most jobs are designed to provide stability, not wealth. That's not a flaw. That's the point. Companies don't hire employees to make them rich. They hire employees to create value for owners. And Buffett always paid close attention to who owned the value. He saw that employees trade time for money. Owners trade money for time. And those two paths lead to very different outcomes. Most people never stop to think about this because the system rewards obedience and consistency. You're taught that a good job, a steady paycheck, and loyalty are the responsible path. Buffett didn't argue that jobs are bad. He argued that jobs alone don't create leverage. And without leverage, wealth grows very slowly, if it grows at all. Leverage doesn't mean debt here, it means scale. When you work a job, your income is tied directly to your presence. If you don't show up, the money stops. If the company struggles, you feel it immediately. If the economy slows, you're exposed. Buffett saw this as fragility, not because employees are weak, but because the structure is. Most employees are one decision away from zero income. A manager's call, a company restructuring, a market downturn, something they don't control. Buffett didn't like systems where outcomes depend on things you don't control. That's why he paid attention to ownership. Owners get paid whether they show up or not. Owners benefit from scale. Owners earn from growth. They didn't personally work for that day. Employees don't. This isn't a moral judgment. It's a mechanical one. Buffett was obsessed with mechanics. He didn't ask who works the hardest. He asked who benefits when things grow. And the answer was rarely employees. Most employees believe they're safe because their income is predictable. But Buffett saw predictability as a double-edged sword. Predictable income often means predictable limits. You can only work so many hours. You can only get so many raises. You can only climb so many steps. At some point, time runs out. Buffett understood that wealth is built by separating income from time. And most jobs do the opposite. They lock income tightly to time. That's why most employees never get rich. Not because they're doing something wrong, but because they're playing a game with fixed rules. And those rules favor ownership, not labor. Here's another uncomfortable point. Most employees think risk is something to avoid. They choose jobs because jobs feel safe. But Buffett saw a different kind of risk. He saw the risk of staying in one place for decades with limited upside. He saw the risk of inflation slowly eating purchasing power. The risk of skills becoming outdated. The risk of being dependent on one income source. Those risks don't feel dramatic. They feel quiet. And quiet risks are the most dangerous ones. Buffett didn't admire people who avoided all risk. He admired people who understood which risks were invisible. Employees avoid visible risk, like starting something new, but accept invisible risk, like lifetime income caps. Buffett flipped that thinking. He believed the biggest risk was spending your entire life earning money without building anything that could earn without you. That's why this idea makes people uncomfortable, because it challenges the story most of us were taught. You were told, get educated, get a job, work hard, save, retire. And for many people, that story leads to survival, not wealth. Buffett wasn't criticizing survival. He was pointing out the ceiling. Most employees hit that ceiling without realizing it exists. They save diligently, They invest conservatively, they do everything right, and still feel behind. Buffett saw that the math rarely works out in a big way unless ownership enters the picture. Ownership of businesses, ownership of assets, ownership of systems that scale. Employees rent their time. Owners own outcomes. That's the difference. Another thing Buffett noticed is that employees are trained to think linearly. Work more, earn more. Wait longer, get promoted. Stay loyal, be rewarded. But wealth grows non-linearly. It jumps, it compounds, it accelerates, and linear systems don't benefit much from non-linear outcomes. Most employees never experience that acceleration because their income grows in steps, not waves. Buffett understood that if you want different results, you can't rely on systems designed for stability. That doesn't mean quit your job tomorrow. It means understand the limits of the path you're on. Most people don't. They confuse effort with progress. They confuse motion with leverage. They confuse income with wealth. And Buffett never made those mistakes. He respected employees, but he never confused employment with ownership. He knew that the world rewards those who own productive assets, not those who simply work around them. That's why his statement shocks people. Because it's not insulting, it's not arrogant, it's not dismissive. It's structural. Most employees will never be rich because their system isn't designed for it, not because they lack discipline, not because they lack intelligence, not because they don't work hard enough, but because the upside is capped long before wealth can compound meaningfully. Buffett saw this clearly, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start realizing that safety and wealth don't always live in the same place, that predictability often comes at the cost of upside. That comfort today can quietly limit tomorrow. This doesn't mean everyone should be an entrepreneur. It doesn't mean jobs are useless. It doesn't mean employees are stuck forever. It means understanding the game you're playing. Buffett always said the most dangerous thing is not knowing the rules of the game you're in. Most employees think they're building wealth when they're really just maintaining stability. And stability is fine until you realize it doesn't compound. That realization is the beginning of everything else we're about to talk about. Because once you understand why Buffett believed this, you can start seeing your own decisions differently. Not with panic, not with shame, but with clarity. And clarity is where real change starts. Real change starts. Before this goes any further, something needs to be said clearly. When Warren Buffett talked about employees and wealth, he was not attacking workers. He wasn't looking down on people with jobs. He wasn't saying employees are lazy, dumb, or doing life wrong. That's not who he was. Buffett respected work. He respected effort. He respected people who showed up every day and did their job well. What he didn't respect was pretending that effort alone leads to wealth. And that difference matters, because most people don't stay employees because they love the structure. They stay because they believe it's the safest path to a good life. They believe that if they follow the rules, things will eventually work out. Buffett questioned that belief, not emotionally, not angrily, but logically. He looked at outcomes. He looked at decades of data. He looked at who actually became wealthy. He looked at who stayed stuck despite doing everything right. And he noticed a pattern that made a lot of people uncomfortable. Most employees weren't falling behind because they made bad choices. They were falling behind because the system they were in was never built to make them rich in the first place. That doesn't mean it's a bad system. It means it has a purpose. Jobs exist to provide income stability. They exist to reduce uncertainty for the worker and transfer risk to the company. That's valuable. That's necessary. Society needs that. But stability and wealth are not the same goal. And Buffett was very clear about that distinction. This intro is important because many people misunderstand Buffett's point. They hear a harsh statement and assume it's an insult. It's not. It's a diagnosis. Buffett didn't ask who deserves to be rich. He asked what structures actually produce wealth over time. And when you ask that question honestly, jobs don't rank very high. Not because jobs are bad, but because jobs cap upside. Most employees are paid based on time, not results. Even high-paying jobs usually have ceilings. Salaries increase slowly, promotions are limited. Bonuses depend on factors outside your control. Buffett saw this as a math problem, not a moral one. If your income grows in a straight line, but the cost of living grows exponentially, the gap gets wider over time, and no amount of discipline fully fixes that. That's what Buffett was pointing at. Most people assume wealth is about income. Buffett understood it's about what you own. And that's where the misunderstanding begins. Employees often own very little of the systems they work inside. They contribute value, but they don't capture much of the long-term upside. That upside flows to owners. Buffett didn't invent this. He just didn't ignore it. Another thing that gets missed is that Buffett wasn't saying employees can't build wealth at all. He was saying it's unlikely if employment is the only strategy. And unlikely is very different from impossible. But most people live their entire lives assuming unlikely is good enough. Buffett didn't like unlikely outcomes. He liked odds. He liked paths where the math worked in his favor over time. And when he looked at the employee path, the odds weren't great for serious wealth. Not because employees fail, but because the structure limits compounding. That's the key word, compounding. Compounding works best when returns reinvest into ownership, when growth feeds growth, when effort today creates value tomorrow without repeating the same work. Most jobs don't do that. You work today, you get paid today. Tomorrow starts from zero again. Buffett saw that as a treadmill, a comfortable treadmill maybe, a predictable one, but still a treadmill. This is where people get defensive, because they hear this and think it means they made a mistake choosing a job. That's not what Buffett believed. He believed most people choose jobs because they value security, and that's reasonable. But he also believed security comes at a cost. That cost is upside. You give up extreme upside in exchange for reduced volatility. That's the trade. The problem is that most people don't realize they made that trade. They think they're on a path that leads somewhere big if they just stay long enough. Buffett realized that for most employees, time alone doesn't change the equation. Waiting doesn't fix capped upside. This intro is about reframing that reality without panic. Because the point is not quit your job. The point is understand the limits of your job. Buffett always believed that clarity comes before action. If you don't understand your position, any move you make is likely emotional. He wanted people to see the structure they were inside, to see how income is created, to see who benefits when growth happens, to see where leverage actually sits. Most employees never look at this. They focus on performance reviews, raises, titles, and benefits. All important, but none of them change the underlying structure. Buffett was never impressed by titles. He cared about ownership, because ownership changes incentives. When you own something, growth works for you. When you don't, growth can pass right through you. This is why Buffett said what he said. Not to insult employees, but to wake them up. He wanted people to stop confusing safety with progress. A job can keep you afloat, it can keep you stable, it can keep you comfortable. But comfort is not the same as wealth. And Buffett didn't confuse the two. Another thing worth saying clearly, Buffett himself started with very little. He didn't inherit wealth. He didn't skip the struggle. He just understood early that if he stayed on the employee path forever, the math wouldn't work. So he focused on building ownership as soon as he could. Not recklessly, not blindly, but deliberately. This intro sets up the core question of the video. If most employees aren't getting rich, not because they fail, but because the system limits them, what exactly is the problem? What are the invisible constraints? What beliefs keep people stuck? What trade-offs are people making without realizing it? That's what we're about to explore. Because once you understand the problem clearly, the emotional reaction fades and logic takes over. And logic is where Buffett always lived. He didn't shame people for choosing stability. He just refused to pretend stability leads to wealth. That honesty is uncomfortable, but it's also empowering, because once you see the limits of a system, you can start thinking beyond it, without blowing up your life, without taking reckless risks, and without falling for fake promises. That's what this video is really about. Not telling you what to do, but helping you see the game clearly. And once you see the game, you can decide how you want to play it. The real problem isn't that people choose to be employees. The problem is that most people never realize that choice really means over time. Being an employee feels safe, predictable, responsible. You trade your time, your skills, and your effort for a steady paycheck. In return, you get stability. You know when money is coming in. You know roughly how much. You can plan your life around it. That stability is valuable. But Buffett noticed something important. Stability and wealth don't grow in the same way. Most employees assume that if they keep doing the right things, working hard, being loyal, improving skills, saving, investing carefully, the outcome will eventually look like wealth. And sometimes it does, at a small scale. But the majority never get close to real financial independence. Not because they fail, but because the structure they're in quietly caps upside. The first part of the problem is that employees are paid for time, not ownership. Time is limited. No matter how skilled you are, you only have so many hours in a day. Even if you get paid well per hour, the math doesn't change. There's a ceiling built into the system. You can work harder, you can negotiate raises, you can get promoted. But all of those are incremental. Buffett understood that incremental gains rarely lead to exponential outcomes. Wealth grows exponentially when returns build on previous returns. When growth feeds growth. When you benefit from scale without adding more hours. Most jobs don't allow that. Every year you start again. Every paycheck is tied to recent effort. Every break pauses income. There's no real compounding of labor. That's a massive disadvantage, even if it doesn't feel like one day to day. The second part of the problem is control. Employees don't control the system that pays them. They depend on decisions made by others. Managers, executives, boards, markets. You can be great at your job and still lose income because of forces you had nothing to do with. Buffett didn't like dependency, not because it's humiliating, but because it's risky. When your income depends on one employer, you carry concentration risk. And concentration risk is dangerous, even if it feels normal. Most employees have one main source of income. If that source disappears, everything feels unstable immediately. Buffett saw that as fragility. The third part of the problem is misaligned incentives. Employees are rewarded for performance within a narrow scope. Do your job well, hit targets, follow rules, don't rock the boat. Those incentives are designed to keep the system running smoothly, not to help you build wealth. You are encouraged to be reliable, not scalable. Buffett understood that systems reward what they're designed to reward. Jobs reward consistency. Ownership rewards growth. Those are different games. Most employees spend decades playing a game that doesn't reward long-term ownership thinking. They become very good at execution, but not at building assets. That's not a personal flaw. It's a training outcome. The fourth part of the problem is inflation and time. Even if an employee saves diligently, inflation quietly erodes purchasing power. Raises often barely keep up. Costs increase faster than income. Buffett understood that time works against people whose income grows slowly and predictably. Compounding works best when growth outpaces inflation. Most salaries don't, so people feel like they're moving forward while actually standing still. They earn more numbers on paper, but their lifestyle costs absorb the gains. And because the progress feels slow but steady, there's no alarm. That's one of the most dangerous situations financially. The fifth part of the problem is false security. Jobs feel safe because income is regular. But that safety is conditional. It depends on continued demand, continued health, continued relevance, continued stability. Buffett noticed that employees often underestimate how fragile job security really is. Industries change, skills become outdated, companies restructure. When that happens, employees feel blindsided. Not because the change was unpredictable, but because they assumed stability was permanent. Buffett never assumed permanence. He assumed change. And when you assume change, relying entirely on employment becomes risky. The sixth part of the problem is psychological comfort. Jobs provide identity, structure, routine, social validation. You know where you fit. That comfort makes people less likely to question the system. Most employees don't ask, is this path actually leading where I want to go? They ask, how can I do better inside this path? That's a subtle but critical difference. Buffett always stepped back to look at the whole system, not just how to optimize inside it. The seventh part of the problem is delayed realization. The employee path works well early in life. Income rises quickly at first. Skills improve. Promotions feel meaningful. It's only later, often in the 40s or 50s, that people realize something feels off. They worked hard. They did everything right. But wealth didn't arrive. At that point, changing direction feels risky and expensive. Buffett understood that the cost of delay compounds too. The earlier you understand structural limits, the more options you have. The eighth part of the problem is lack of leverage. Leverage doesn't mean debt here. It means the ability to earn without direct effort every time. Employees rarely have leverage. Their output scales linearly with effort. Buffett focused obsessively on leverage through ownership, owning businesses, owning assets, owning systems. That's where wealth lives. Employees are close to value creation, but far from value capture. That gap matters. The ninth part of the problem is confusing saving with wealth building. Saving is important. Buffett valued it. But saving alone doesn't create wealth at scale. Saving preserves money. Ownership multiplies it. Most employees rely heavily on saving because it's what they can control. But control doesn't equal upside. Buffett saved early so he could own later. Many employees save forever but never cross into ownership in a meaningful way. The 10th part of the problem is belief. People believe that staying loyal will be rewarded, that companies will take care of them, that time alone will solve financial problems. Sometimes that belief works. Often it doesn't. Buffett believed in incentives, not promises. He trusted systems that rewarded ownership automatically, not ones that depended on fairness or goodwill. That belief shaped everything he did. The final and biggest problem is this. Most employees don't realize they're in a system designed for stability, not wealth, and they don't notice until the compounding window has passed. That's not tragedy, but it's reality. Buffett wasn't saying employees are doomed. He was saying the path itself doesn't do the heavy lifting people think it does. Once you understand that, the conversation changes. It's no longer about blaming jobs. It's about understanding limits. It's about seeing trade-offs clearly. And that understanding is the foundation for better decisions. Because if you don't know what the problem really is, any solution you chase will be emotional, rushed, or unrealistic. Buffett never rushed. He understood the problem first. And that's exactly what we've done here. Once Buffett understood the limits of being an employee, he didn't react emotionally. He didn't rage against the system. He didn't tell people to quit their jobs or rebel against work. He simply adjusted his strategy. That's an important distinction. Buffett never believed the solution was dramatic action. He believed the solution was better positioning over time. He knew most people start as employees. He did too. The difference is that he never planned to stay only an employee forever. He treated employment as a starting point, not a destination. And that mindset changes everything. The first thing Buffett focused on was ownership. Even when it was small. He didn't wait to become rich to start owning things. He started owning things so he could eventually become rich. That meant buying small pieces of businesses, learning how businesses actually make money, understanding cash flow, margins, pricing power, and customer behavior. Employees often see only a small slice of how a company works. Owners see the whole picture. Buffett wanted the whole picture. Because once you see how money flows through a business, you stop thinking only in terms of wages. You start thinking in terms of systems. And systems scale. The second thing Buffett understood is that ownership doesn't require quitting your job. This is where many people get confused. They think the only way out of the employee path is entrepreneurship, risk, or chaos. Buffett didn't think that way. He believed you could be an employee and an owner at the same time. You can earn income from a job while slowly building ownership on the side. That might be through investing. It might be through buying businesses. It might be through building something that can run without you full-time. The key is not replacing income immediately. The key is decoupling income from time gradually. Most people try to jump too fast. Buffett moved slowly and deliberately. The third thing Buffett focused on was capital allocation. Employees are trained to allocate time. Owners are trained to allocate capital. Time allocation has limits. Capital allocation doesn't. Buffett learned to think carefully about where each dollar should go. Not emotionally, not impulsively, but rationally. He asked questions like, does this asset grow on its own? Does it require my constant attention? Does it benefit from scale? Does it protect against inflation? These are ownership questions, not employee questions. Employees are rewarded for execution. Owners are rewarded for judgment. Buffett worked hard to move from one mindset to the other. The fourth thing Buffett understood is patience. Most employees are impatient not because they're greedy, but because their progress feels slow. Raises take time, promotions take time, savings take time. So people start chasing shortcuts. Buffett avoided shortcuts. He understood that ownership compounds slowly at first and then suddenly. That early progress looks boring, that nothing seems to be happening. But that's exactly when the foundation is being built. He was comfortable being early and quiet. Most people want visible progress. Buffett wanted irreversible progress. The fifth thing Buffett focused on was learning, not credentials. Employees are often taught that education ends with degrees or certifications. Buffett believed learning never stops and that most of the valuable learning happens outside formal systems. He read constantly. He studied businesses obsessively. He learned from mistakes, his own and others. This learning wasn't abstract. It was practical. He learned how companies fail, how they succeed, how incentives distort behavior, how growth can destroy value if done poorly. That knowledge gave him an edge most employees never develop because their role doesn't require it. The sixth thing Buffett understood is risk perception. Most employees believe ownership is risky and employment is safe. Buffett believed the opposite in many cases. A single job is concentrated risk. Ownership across many assets is diversified risk. Employees often put all their financial security into one employer. Buffett spread risk across businesses, industries, and time. He didn't fear volatility, he feared dependence. That's a critical shift. The seventh thing Buffett focused on was margin of safety. Employees usually operate with thin margins. One missed paycheck can cause stress. One layoff can derail plans. Buffett wanted wide margins. That meant saving aggressively early, living below his means, avoiding lifestyle inflation. Not because he was cheap, but because flexibility matters. Margin of safety buys time. Time buys clarity. Clarity buys opportunity. Employees with no margin of safety can't take advantage of opportunities even when they see them. Buffett built margin before ambition. The eighth thing Buffett understood is incentives. He paid close attention to who benefits when something grows. Employees benefit modestly. Owners benefit massively. Once you see this clearly, you stop being surprised by outcomes. Buffett didn't blame the system. He positioned himself inside the part of the system that compounds. He aligned himself with incentives instead of fighting them. The ninth thing Buffett focused on was simplicity. Many people overcomplicate their escape from employment. They chase complex businesses, risky ventures, or trendy ideas. Buffett avoided complexity. He preferred simple businesses with clear economics, simple investments with understandable risks, simple decisions repeated consistently. Complexity often hides risk. Simplicity exposes it. That's why Buffett said no far more often than he said yes. The 10th thing Buffett understood is identity. Many employees tie their identity to their job, their title, their role. Buffett tied his identity to being a rational allocator of capital. That difference matters. If your identity depends on your job, leaving or changing feels terrifying. If your identity depends on how you think, transitions are easier. Buffett protected his thinking above all else. The 11th thing Buffett believed is that most people don't need extreme outcomes. They don't need to be billionaires. They just need enough ownership so that time stops working against them. Once your assets grow faster than your expenses, everything changes. That's the line Buffett focused on crossing. Not fame, not status, not speed, freedom. The 12th thing Buffett understood is sequence. You don't start with freedom. You earn it. You start with income, then savings, then ownership, then compounding. Employees who skip steps usually fail. Buffett respected the sequence. That's why his advice feels boring, but works. The 13th thing Buffett focused on was control over decisions. He didn't want his future dictated by corporate policies, economic cycles, or other people's priorities. Ownership gave him control. Not absolute control, but more than employment ever could. The 14th thing Buffett understood is time horizon. Employees often think in weeks and months. Owners think in years and decades. Buffett always extended his horizon. He asked, where does this lead in 10 years, not what happens next quarter? That shift alone separates most employees from most owners. The final thing Buffett understood is this. You don't escape the employee trap by hating your job. You escape it by building ownership quietly and patiently while you still have income. That's the real lesson. No drama, no panic. No fantasy. Just clear thinking and long-term positioning. This development phase shows that Buffett didn't reject employment. He just refused to confuse it with wealth building. He respected work, but he worked toward ownership. And once you understand that, the emotional charge disappears. The question is no longer, should I quit my job? It becomes, what am I slowly building that doesn't depend on my job? That question changes everything. Now we're ready for the turning point, the moment where this thinking becomes unavoidable and deeply personal. This is the moment where the idea stops being interesting and starts being uncomfortable. Because by now, it should feel familiar. Not because someone told you this before, but because you've lived parts of it. You've felt the ceiling. Maybe not all at once, maybe not clearly, but you've felt it. That quiet feeling that no matter how hard you work, the progress feels slow. That raises help, but never change the game. That promotions come with more stress, not more freedom. That time keeps passing faster than your financial position improves. And that's when Buffett's point stops being abstract. Because the climax of this idea isn't about employees versus owners. It's about realizing that effort alone doesn't break ceilings. Most employees believe the ceiling is temporary. They think it will move later, after the next raise, after the next promotion, after the next year. Buffett understood something most people don't want to face. For many roles, the ceiling doesn't move. You just get closer to it. That's the hard truth. The system rewards you for staying productive, but not for becoming free. And the most painful part is that the system doesn't feel cruel. It feels fair. You show up, you do your job, you get paid. Nothing feels broken. But wealth doesn't come from fairness. It comes from ownership and leverage. And this is where the illusion breaks. Because once you realize the ceiling exists, you start noticing how many decisions in your life are shaped by it. You don't take time off because income pauses. You don't take risks because stability feels fragile. You don't explore ownership because the paycheck feels safer. Not because you lack courage, but because the system trained you that way. Buffett saw this pattern again and again. People weren't trapped by chains, they were trapped by comfort. Comfort creates routines. Routines create dependency. Dependency creates fear of change, and fear keeps people exactly where they are. The climax is realizing that most employees are not choosing their path every day. They chose it once, and then inertia took over. Years pass quietly inside that inertia. And then one day the realization hits hard. You're older, you're more experienced, you've worked harder than ever, but the options feel fewer, not more. That's the moment Buffett wanted people to avoid. Not because age is bad, but because options shrink when ownership hasn't been built early. This is where the idea becomes deeply personal. You start asking yourself uncomfortable questions. If I stopped working tomorrow, what keeps paying me? If my job disappeared, what would replace it? If inflation doubled, would my income keep up? For most employees, the answers are unsettling. And Buffett knew that. He knew that employment creates dependence on continuity. You need the company to exist. You need the role to stay relevant. You need the economy to cooperate. That's a lot of assumptions. Buffett didn't like assumptions. He believed the future would break many of them. And when assumptions break, employees feel it first. Owners feel volatility, employees feel instability. That's the difference. The climax is realizing that employment doesn't protect you from risk, it just hides it. The risk is delayed, the risk is quiet, the risk is disguised as safety. Until it shows up all at once. Layoffs, outsourcing, automation, burnout. Suddenly the path that felt safe feels fragile. Buffett saw this fragility early. That's why he didn't measure security by paychecks. He measured it by ownership. Ownership survives change. Jobs adapt to it, sometimes poorly. And here's the part most people don't want to hear. The longer you stay only an employee, the harder it becomes to change. Not because you can't, but because the cost rises. You have responsibilities, you have habits, you have expectations to meet, and fear becomes louder than curiosity. Buffett knew fear is the enemy of good decisions. That's why he wanted to build ownership before fear took over. The climax is also realizing that saving alone doesn't solve this. Many employees do everything right. They save, they invest cautiously, they avoid mistakes, and still feel stuck. Because saving is defensive, ownership is offensive. Saving protects what you have. Ownership creates more. Buffett saved early so he could own later. Many employees save forever and never cross that line. And once you realize that, the frustration starts to make sense. You weren't lazy, you weren't irresponsible, you weren't careless, you were just playing a game with limited upside. The climax is seeing that effort without leverage is exhausting. You can only push so hard before burnout appears. You can only optimize so much before progress stalls. Buffett didn't want to outwork everyone. He wanted to outposition them. And positioning beats effort over long periods of time. This realization changes how you see success stories. You start noticing that the people who build real wealth usually own something: a business, equity, assets, systems. They don't just earn more, they earn differently, and that difference compounds. The climax is also about ego. Many people take pride in being reliable employees, responsible, hardworking, dependable. Buffett respected that, but he didn't confuse pride with results. He didn't care how hard something felt, he cared where it led. And that's the part that hurts. Because effort feels noble. Ownership feels distant. But wealth doesn't respond to effort alone. It responds to structure. The climax moment is when you stop asking, "How do I do better at my job?" and start asking, "What am I building that exists without my job?" That shift is everything. It doesn't mean you quit. It doesn't mean you rebel. It means you stop pretending employment is enough. Buffett didn't insult employees. He respected them enough to tell the truth. The truth is, most employees are rewarded just enough to stay, but not enough to escape. And that's not accidental. That's how systems work. The system doesn't hate you. It just doesn't exist to make you rich. Once you see that, the anger fades. Clarity replaces it. You stop blaming your boss. You stop blaming the economy. You stop blaming yourself. You start focusing on positioning. And that's exactly where Buffett lived. This climax isn't about fear. It's about awareness. It's the moment you realize that if you want a different outcome, you can't rely on a system designed for something else. And that realization, while uncomfortable, is powerful. Because it gives you back choice. Not overnight. Not recklessly, but intentionally. You can stay employed and still build ownership. You can earn income and still create leverage. You can be responsible and still think long-term. Buffett did all three. And the moment you understand that, the illusion breaks. You're no longer confused about why so many hardworking people never get rich. You finally see the structure. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. After everything we've walked through, Buffett's message becomes much simpler than it first sounds. He wasn't saying employees are wrong. He wasn't saying jobs are useless. He wasn't saying everyone should quit and chase something risky. What he was saying is this: if employment is the only plan, wealth is unlikely. Not impossible, just unlikely. And that's an important difference. Buffett believed most people don't fail financially because they make terrible choices. They fail because they rely on systems that were never designed to take them where they hope to go. Jobs are designed to provide income, designed to reduce uncertainty. They are designed to trade upside for stability. And there's nothing wrong with that, unless you confuse it with a wealth strategy. That confusion is the real danger. Most employees don't realize they've accepted a ceiling. Not explicitly, not consciously, but structurally. They accept it when income is tied to hours. They accept it when raises are incremental. They accept it when savings are the only growth tool. And because the system works well enough, they don't question it. Buffett questioned it early. He didn't panic. He didn't rebel. He didn't judge others. He just chose not to confuse effort with leverage. That's the lesson most people miss. Effort matters. Discipline matters. Consistency matters. But without ownership, they don't scale. Buffett respected employees, but he respected math more. And the math says that linear income struggles to outrun inflation, time, and rising costs over decades, especially when life throws interruptions, responsibilities, and surprises into the mix. Buffett didn't build wealth by working harder than everyone else. He built it by positioning himself where effort could compound. That's a very different mindset. And it doesn't require quitting your job. It requires seeing your job for what it is, and for what it isn't. A job can fund your life, it can support your family, it can give structure and purpose. But it doesn't usually build ownership on its own. Ownership has to be intentional. That's what Buffett was warning people about. He saw too many smart, hard-working people wake up late in life and realize they had nothing that worked for them without their constant presence. No assets producing income, no equity growing quietly, no leverage working while they slept, just more years behind them and fewer options ahead. He wanted people to avoid that moment, not by taking reckless risks, not by chasing shortcuts, but by understanding the structure early enough to act calmly. That's why his advice feels uncomfortable, because it asks you to separate pride from outcomes. You can be proud of your work and still admit the system has limits. You can be grateful for stability and still build ownership on the side. You can be responsible and still think long-term. Buffett didn't believe in extremes. He believed in balance, with clarity. He believed people should earn income first, then convert some of that income into ownership. Slowly, carefully, patiently, he believed in building margin before ambition, learning before risking, positioning before scaling. That's not flashy advice, it doesn't sell dreams, but it works, and it respects reality. The biggest takeaway here isn't that employees can't get rich. It's that wealth doesn't happen by accident, and it rarely happens inside systems designed for predictability. Wealth comes from leverage, from ownership, from compounding. And those things don't appear just because time passes. They have to be built. Buffett didn't rush. He didn't force outcomes. He didn't chase status. He simply made sure that as years passed, more and more of his life became independent of his labor. That's what freedom looks like. Not quitting work, not avoiding effort, but reaching a point where effort is a choice, not a requirement. That's what most employees never reach. Not because they're incapable, but because the path they're on doesn't naturally lead there. Buffett wanted people to see that early enough to adjust. Not to feel ashamed, not to feel angry, but to feel informed. Because once you understand the game, you stop playing it blindly. You stop measuring success only by raises and titles. You stop confusing activity with progress. You start asking better questions. What do I own? What grows without me? What benefits from time instead of fighting it? Those questions change everything. And they don't demand immediate answers. They just demand awareness. Buffett believed awareness was the real edge. Not IQ, not hustle, not luck. Awareness of incentives, awareness of structure, awareness of how money actually works. That awareness is what separates people who stay stuck from people who quietly move ahead. And once you have it, the pressure eases. You stop racing, you stop comparing, you stop chasing what doesn't fit, you start building something that does. That's the real message behind the headline. Not that most employees will never be rich, but that most never change the structure that keeps them from getting there. And that can change. Slowly, intentionally, calmly. Just like Buffett did. Watch the next video.